and welcome to the Light and Energy Show with me, Claire Wiles. At the end of March this year, there's going to be a change in legislation that will affect many, many people. Anybody who takes nutritional supplements, herbal medicines, will be affected by this change. And as a nutritional therapist, I have great concern over this. And there's an organisation that's working really hard on our behalf to guide people through the minefield of this legislation and help them to discover what they can do for themselves. And that's the Alliance for Natural Health. And I'm joined today by Dr. Robert Verkerk. He's founder, executive and scientific director of the Alliance for Natural Health International. So welcome, Dr. Verkerk. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Claire, that's a pleasure. I'm glad to be of assistance.
That's great, thank you. I wonder if we could start by you giving us a general outline of the legislation for our listeners, please.
Well, there are actually a whole range of different pieces of legislation that are part of a European scheme to effectively replace national legislation affecting the natural health sector with European legislation. And this is something that is really being controlled from Brussels. The UK government has actually been wrapped across the knuckles on more than one occasions for doing its own thing, particularly in relation to the use of herbs and the exemption of certain types of herbs that have been used by herbal practitioners. And now it's playing part of the European, it's engaging with the European game plan. And in essence, there are basically a series of directives, of which there are 4 that we regard as being of absolute seminal importance to the ongoing practice of nutritional therapy and related therapies. The first one is the Food Supplements Directive. This one came into play in 2002. It became really active in member states, including the UK, from 2005. And essentially what it's moved the industry towards is, particularly in the area of vitamins and minerals, is only allowing the use of vitamin and mineral forms that are on an approved positive list. And we were actually very concerned with the development of this directive, simply because there was such a large number of forms, around about 300 that were in common usage in the UK, that were not likely to get on the list, mainly because it was too expensive for players to actually afford the costs of assembling dossiers for them. And we've taken one major legal action where we took a case to the European Court of Justice, and actually we have secured an arrangement whereby natural sources of nutrients can be used EU-wide, even if they're not on this positive list, which is obviously a plus. This directive, its second major component has yet to be fully implemented, and that will be the imposition of maximum levels for vitamin and mineral used in both food supplements and functional and fortified foods. This has been an area of huge debate across Europe. We have, for 6 years or so, we've been evaluating the science that is being used to try and determine what kind of numbers are going to represent the maximum levels. And we have recently published 2 major peer-reviewed research papers that expose, if you like, particular flaws and problems associated with the methodologies that are under consideration for use. We also have petitions in the European Parliament where we are effectively still getting support from the European Parliament to effectively block its recognition of the kind of science that the European Commission and the European Food Safety Authority is using. So, it's a matter of time before we see numbers. It could be a matter of a few weeks or months away. It could be next year. The process has been delayed since about 2007. So vitamins and minerals get greatly impacted, and particularly if you're looking at higher doses of nutrients used by nutritional therapists, that will be an issue that is of great significance to nutritional therapists, and it needs to be, as far as we're concerned, unless there is an acceptable value for these maximum levels, it should be fought every step of the way.
I quite agree. I mean, as we know, the recommended daily allowance is the amount really that's needed for any health at all, and to actually help somebody achieve better health we need to use reasonably high levels of particular nutrients, and if we're forbidden from doing so, that hinders our job completely.
That's right. The Germans have been right at the forefront of this. They have a Federal Institute for Risk Assessment that has already been putting numbers from as early as 2004, 2005 to what they foresee should be maximum levels. They're actually using those levels for any new product that is introduced to the German market, and they are astoundingly low. I mean, the highest level for vitamin C is 225 milligrams. Highest level for B6 is 5.6 milligrams.
Good grief.
The highest level for vitamin B12 is a staggering 9 micrograms.
It's just appalling, isn't it? Absolutely appalling. Exactly. Despite all the evidence to show that you need, vitamin C, you should be looking at 1,000 milligrams a day. I mean, it barely scratches the surface, does it?
Precisely, but there is a sort of misunderstanding of risk assessment science that has been adopted in order to create artificially low levels, and this is kind of where the real battleground is in a scientific arena. And having sent the 2 research papers that I prepared on this whole issue, having sent them to the European Commission and then going over to Brussels and having a meeting with the Basil Mathiodakis, who heads up the part of the Directorate General for Consumer Protection that looks after food supplements, and said, have they received the papers and what are their thoughts on them? And this is sitting around with Mr. Mathiodakis and a number of his colleagues. He said, well, yes, we have received them because we received them hard copy, we receive them electronically, and we receive them by fax. And we don't tend to leave stones unturned in that regard. But he said, we are having difficulty finding people within our section who understand the science. And to be frank, I was astounded at that comment because... if they can't understand the very science that they're dealing with, we have a problem, Houston. So that really is the first big directive.
I mean, how can they make decisions if they don't have the scientific knowledge in order to make those decisions?
Well, there is this huge buck passing that goes on between the European Commission and the European Food Safety Authority. So if we deal with EFSA and criticize them, they say, well, yeah, but we only give opinions, and it's the European Commission and the member states that follow through. You talk to the member states and the Commission, they blame it all on EFSA. So it's a very unsatisfactory situation.
It certainly is, isn't it? Yeah, it's quite horrendous. So whose sort of underlying agenda is all this, do you think? Who's instigating this change?
Well, there are a whole range of players. These regulatory frameworks tend not to come out of nowhere. They usually come as a result of many years of discussion from different vested interests who are either looking at protecting their interests or actually expanding their particular markets and removing sort of obstacles to the market. So from this point of view, you've got the perfect smoking gun in the form of the over-the-counter medicine associations, such as the European one, AESGP, that has been promoting the entire regulatory framework and doing it alongside major players in the European Commission and even certain players in the European Parliament for years. And these associations and their members really are into trying to sell dumb down products into as many European markets as they can. And if they do that in such a way that they don't compete with their big members that are generally drug companies whose core competence it is to sell new to nature patented
Yeah,
drugs,
yeah,
but they also sell fairly low dose so-called natural health products, many of which are synthetic, in the major multiples and pharmacies around Europe. And let's not forget those kinds of products easily dominate the marketplace. We as a nutritional therapist, you would tend not to think very much of them because very few people would use them to try and get any major kind of health outcome.
yes.
But if you look at the dollars and the cents, or the pounds and the pence, or the euros and the cents of it all, you'll find that they far and away make up the largest sector of the market. So
Absolutely. They're
in
there
that
to create
sense,
sales, aren't they?
exactly. And you can find those products in every
You can.
supermarket and in
Yeah,
every pharmacy,
yeah.
and they tend to be pretty low dose products. And on the whole, those companies that are selling those kinds of products have not enjoyed the fact that all the different member states have had different regulatory regimes. So to have a harmonized system whereby you've got the same one size fits all kind of approach, even if you have to dumb it down to make sure that the Germans and the Danes and other countries that have had very restrictive national policies are happy, so be it, because you still are able to sell your products. And of course, from a business point of view, there is good evidence to suggest that low dose markets are very profitable markets. So
Well,
Germany, which has a very low dose regime for vitamins and minerals, is actually the number one market for vitamins and minerals EU wide.
right. Yeah. And you see, people don't know the difference, do they? If they're in the supermarket and they're doing their shopping and they see a vitamin and mineral supplement on the shelf, they pop it into their shopping basket with no knowledge at all. And why would they have the knowledge that each vitamin and mineral product can vary so much in its strength, and oftentimes the product that they're taking is of no value at all.
Correct. The other major three regulations, just to cover them off very briefly, and we can come back to them if you'd like to know more about each of them, is the Herbal Directive, the Traditional Herbal Medicinal Products Directive, which basically was designed to be a simplified drug licensing system for herbal medicinal products. That was passed in the European Parliament in 2004. It has a 7-year transition phase that has allowed companies time, supposedly, to get their products licensed if they are deemed herbal medicinal products. Now, there are specific eligibility requirements, including the requirement to demonstrate 30 years continuous safe use, of which 15 years are in the EU, which actually locks out many non-European herbal products. But there are also other requirements. For example, the indication, the purpose for which the product is to be used, needs to be only for minor self-limiting conditions. So if you look at many traditional medicines, they're being used for things like diabetes and arthritis and everything from neuropathic problems to neurological problems to pretty much every kind of condition that humans suffer from. And of course, to be slightly facetious about it, the only types that are let through are, sniffs and tickles in the throat.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so a huge number of products are locked out that way. Another way in which products are locked out is by the fact that the technical requirements for the dossiers, the registration dossiers, are so difficult to accomplish, particularly for polyherbal products, that the vast majority of products that have been registered so far are in fact single herb products. And not only are they single herb products, they're also herbs that are of European origin. They're also very few herbs in number. There are only about 40 different species of plant that are covered, when in fact we typically use in Europe over 1,000 species of plant. And they are by and large just alcoholic extracts that are put into a pharmaceutical base, and that
Right.
pharmaceutical base, in many cases, contains artificial preservatives, polymers, artificial sweeteners, and other nasties that most of us wouldn't think should play a part in any traditional herbal product. So essentially, they've created a regime that's designed for traditional systems and actually locks out the majority of the traditions.
Yeah.
Not a single traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic product has got license.
And that's interesting in itself, isn't it? That the oldest form of medicine, they're not giving licenses to.
Well, yes, they either can't. They're not giving licenses because people can't get sufficiently far down the registration scheme.
Yes.
Also, there's a fundamental misunderstanding in terms of how the profile of companies that are supplying traditional medicines, say from the great Oriental traditions, how they work. Typically, you might have a product range of 300 to 800 products, where depending on your precise health status, you may be given, for example, even for a headache, up to 5 different formulations, depending on exactly what your individual state is. And if you have that many products and you have a fixed cost for getting registration, which is going to be generally upwards of £70,000 sterling per product, and in some cases considerably more than £150,000, that makes it absolutely impossible if you're a £500,000 to £3 million a year turnover business. I mean, it makes it absolutely impossible.
It does. It just means it's only the very huge companies that are able to afford to go through this process.
Sure.
Yeah.
And of course, by having that, one of the ways in which it impacts nutritional therapy is, of course, many nutritionists are using herbs. What is increasingly happening is that the UK regulator, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, is deeming herbs that have been used for many years in food supplements. They're now saying, we think these herbs are actually medicines, and you've got a perfectly good regulatory regime to go through. It's called the Traditional Herbal Medicinal Products Directive, and if you can't go through that, tough. And that basically is a very substantial problem for many nutritional therapists. So many people will have heard that the UK government on February the 11th announced the fact that statutory regulation of herbalists
Yes.
had been accepted in principle. And the UK government was very emphatic about the fact that statutory regulation of herbalists would resolve, from the consumer's perspective, many of the losses of products that would be suffered through the THMPD. Now, that isn't the case. That is not a fair explanation for really what is going on, because statutory regulation does not mean that anyone who's a registered herbalist can do whatever they want. What it means is that they have to actually purchase products from approved suppliers that have gone through complete pharmaceutical GMP.
Right.
They are what we call magistral prescriptions. And these magistral prescriptions will be extremely expensive and need to be, formulated for a specific purpose. And the vast majority of people who are, for example, buying a product today, they go down to the health store and they buy it because they might spend, say, £20 on it. They can afford to do that. in order to add that to their monthly shopping bill. If they were then found that the only way of getting the herbs in that product was to see a practitioner, A, they'd have to pay the practitioner his or her fees. On top of that, they'd have to buy whatever herbs could be commissioned for manufacture, and typically it would not be worth their while to buy a single £20 product any longer, which would incidentally cost at least twice as much for the same thing. They'd probably have to buy 3 months worth of products to make it worth their while.
Yeah.
And of course, the simple arithmetic of it is that the cash flow requirement for an individual that wants to go down that route would be prohibitive for most families who are struggling to put the bread and the butter, let alone the herbs, on the table every day.
Yes. Gosh. Okay.
The third big baddie is the nutrition and health claims regulation, and you'll notice it's we're calling it a regulation because that's, in European speak, a regulation is something that does not have to be transposed into a particular country's regulatory system. It applies the minute it comes into effect in Europe, and in that sense, it has great authority, it has great power, it has great reach, and the real disaster from both the practitioner's point of view and the consumer's point of view is that it basically controls everything that couldn't be said or spoken about or communicated digitally in any kind of medium about the health benefits of a commercial product. So from a practitioner's point of view, if you are recommending particular products and you're saying product X is good for condition Y, first of all, there's a great risk that you're going to be making a medicinal claim. But if you talk about the health benefits, i.e., someone who has arthritic problems, and you say, well, this product, such as glucosamine, helps to support your joints, you will only be able to say that if that particular claim has been approved by the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA.
Okay.
And they are in the middle of evaluating some 4,500 generic general function claims, and they're using an extraordinarily high standard of proof that, in fact, many of the health relationships we take for granted would not be able to stand scrutiny at that standard, and that includes, for example, the benefits of fruit and veg, or the reduction of sodium to reduce the risk of hypertension. And to give you, to use the worked example I've just given you of glucosamine, that has failed in being given a claim by EFSA. So you will not be able to make any kind of a claim about any glucosamine product that you may have supplied in the past. There's not a single claim that's gone through for probiotics. Even if you look at things as obvious as the antioxidant content of, red fruits and berries, they also haven't had acceptable claims, because the standard of proof is what is being asked of you is to be able to supply data that establishes a causal relationship between the ingestion of that food or food constituent and a particular health benefit. And the bottom line is the studies have to come from healthy people. So in many cases you'll find that the studies have been done in order to try and demonstrate an effect. They've actually been done on diseased populations. So people who have arthritis, for example.
Yes.
And what you're meant to be doing is of course, after the event, having studied healthy people and see if there's a modification in, for example, a particular biomarker that's associated with inflammation within the joints. If you haven't done that, they won't be able to use the data, and therefore you can't make the claim. So it is a case where Napoleonic law massively interferes with freedom of speech. And Napoleonic law, for those who are not familiar with the concept, is is the idea of being guilty unless proven innocent. So they assume that all claims are effectively misleading and incorrect, and then you have to be able to prove that a claim is appropriate, and you have to, prove that using a standard of science that frankly has been set in such a way to make it almost impossible for most claims to be met. So we are deeply concerned about how effectively people will be able to communicate, both at a clinician's level, but also at the level of the food industry and food suppliers. You go to a health store or supermarket. Currently, there's a lot of information that allows the consumer to determine that watercress might be a little bit more healthy than, for example, spam or processed sausages.
Yes.
But in a world where you can't make any claims, it's going to become much harder for the consumer to differentiate between foods of different quality. And the bottom line is, it's not so bad for those of us who will have lived in an era when we could be freer about the sort of existed. It is going to be a nightmare in our view for generations to come, because they will have grown up in an environment that is very restrictive. And again, in short, we foresee that that something very profound is going to have to happen to create a better, environment for consumers, and that may once again necessitate a legal action.
I mean, the government with their 5 a day, that's going to affect that, isn't it? They're not actually going to be able to make those claims anymore, are they?
Well,
and tell people to do that.
Well, you see, the interesting thing is, if you look at a typical 5 a day claim, it is not made in the context of a commercial product.
Right.
It is a general statement, but
right.
the irony is even more confusing, because the government will be able to make a statement about 5 a day, yet the science behind it does not meet the kind of standards that are required to make a claim about a commercial product. So again, it's a recipe for the consumer getting real mixed messages.
It is, and for people like myself who do many lectures on nutrition and talks and workshops and things, I will have to be very careful on what I say and give a lot of thought before I open my mouth, generally.
Yeah, I mean, in short, you will not be able to say anything about products at all, because any statement about products, unless it's an approved claim, and it looks like only a very small number of health relationships are going to have met the required standards. It's going to make it quite a contorted process trying to communicate openly to people.
It's the implications of this are so massive with regard to freedom of speech, aren't they? I think that people are unaware of how much this is going to impact. We know that perhaps our websites and our literature will be affected, but to think that we won't even be able to verbally communicate these things to a group of people is a massive and very frightening change.
Well, exactly, and of course, from the perspective of websites, the Advertising Standards Authority, the UK, has recently expanded its code of advertising practice to cover the internet. They announced the change with their latest revision of the CAP code on the 1st of September 2010, and it has just become fully implemented as of 1st of March 2011. The worrying thing about this revision is not only do they have the rights as a independent and private organization to force people effectively to toe the line in terms of a CAP code. Let's remember these are rules set by a private entity. They're not government laws. However, what they've done within their latest revision of the CAP code is refer directly to the nutritional health claims regulation when it comes to foods and food supplements. So effectively, the ASA will become another police force for the Department of Health, using a defective European law, namely the Nutritional Health Claims Regulation. And, I think a lot of people in Britain would have expected the British government to stand up there and fight
Yeah.
a piece of European law that wasn't really in its interest,
Mm.
because we really have got a pretty good track record showing that, healthy foods are very good for people and very, very rarely do any harm. And if we are trying to follow a prevention, a disease prevention approach to healthcare, which is actually the only way to go, given the fact that nutrition and lifestyle are now seen to be right at the heart of the primary burdens of disease that are causing the National Health Service to be massively oversubscribed and desperately inefficient. Here we have a very piece of regulation that interferes with the ability of people to communicate effectively about what's healthy and what's not.
It's unbelievably ironic that we're trying to teach children and educate children in schools about what is the best way to eat, and we all know that what we eat is what makes up our bodies, what we assimilate is how our bodies work, and yet we won't be able to actually make those claims anymore.
Correct.
So what about these about functional foods? The margarines and the like that are meant to lower cholesterol or protect our heart.
Well, again, they have done rather well under a provision of the Nutritional Health Claims Regulation, Article 14, that is specifically, we nickname it a passport system for big business, because essentially what they've done is amass their clinical trials on margarine that has some beta-phytosterol added to it. And they have managed to demonstrate that it has a cholesterol-lowering ability. Now, the difficulty is if you're a nutritional practitioner and you supply the same or even a slightly more effective dosage of beta-cytosterol, excuse me, you will not be able to make that claim because it hasn't got, and it's unlikely to get, a generic claim.
Okay.
So, the consumer can buy it with a delivery substrate, namely margarine, when they don't know exactly how much to use. Some of them will recognize that margarine isn't that healthy, and yet the nutritional practitioner will be able to say nothing.
And what about things like, the organic foods being affected? The legislation for what constitutes organic, is that going to change?
Well, that is working in a slightly different arena. The organic standards are being, from a European perspective, managed through the International Federation for Organic Agriculture Movements, IFOAM, and at a sort of macro level, it's being controlled through the Codex Alimentarius, which is the global food code, which is basically being developed by a whole series of Codex member countries, of which there are over 170 odd these days, who are sitting down trying to work out standards that are appropriate to those large businesses. And once again, through Codex, what we've generally seen is a dumbing down of organic standards to the point now that they're much more accessible for mainstream agricultural producers who are able to sell more and more so-called organic foods in supermarkets. And to be frank, those kind of organic foods, and I have to say that this is my background as an agricultural scientist was in the sustainable agriculture area. They are very different in quality compared with what we might think of as organic foods being produced in smallholding, sustainable, agricultural environments, which are genuinely involving, green manures, mulches, rotations. And typically what's happening with the large commercial producers is that they're paying lip service to the concept, and they are just setting aside perhaps a few percent of their land area, not spraying certain herbicides and pesticides, not using certain synthetic fertilizers, and then getting organic certification.
So they're just ticking boxes, really. Okay, so do you think these things will, from the end of March, this is going to be just small changes, so that they hope that people don't notice a change, followed by some massive implications, and then it'll be too late for anybody to object and fight their corner?
Well, first of all, we've got to appreciate that the whole process really started in motion big time from about 2002.
Yes.
It is still running, and it still will be running after 2012. So we're looking at more than a 10-year period of transition. In many cases, once the law has started to bite, it will have actually been set in train many years before, because they have these transition phases carefully built into the process. So and then also they can effectively reduce the consumer outcry by, if you like, titrating their policing and enforcement capacity fairly lightly in the initial phases post-implementation, and then tightening up down the line. And it's very interesting to see how the MHRA are acting right now on the herbal front. What they're saying essentially is, if you've got unlicensed herbal medicines that were legally allowed to be sold under the exemptions to the UK medicines law that is being replaced by the European law, you can carry on doing that on the condition that you, as a seller, had already purchased the products before the 30th of April.
Right.
And essentially, that will allow, rather than these products becoming immediately illegal on the 1st of May, they will start becoming illegal whenever those stocks start to run out, which in some people's cases will be 3 months' time, other cases it might be 1 or 2 years. So again, and by the time people say, where are these herbs all gone? They'll say, well, you should have done something about it earlier.
Yeah.
And that is the main reason that we're preparing to go to court on this herbal issue. We're a long way down the line in terms of preparing the case, and we'll be filing the case hopefully in the next 4 to 8 weeks.
So, is there anything positive that people can do about this?
Well, there is. There's always positive things that can be done, and one of the most important things is not to be apathetic. So a lot of people have felt that they should talk to their MP and allow their MPs to know their concerns about it. A lot of people have been rather frustrated by the fact that they have received standard form responses from MPs. What we would say is now that the problem is clearly seen to be one of a European origin, if you're going to contact any elected representative, focus first of all on your MEP. And then get your support from your local national MP as well. And if people can do that, that is a major starting point. It's very useful to not just engage in a postcard campaign or responding using a form letter, because you'll just get a form letter back. It's much better to produce a personalized response direct to your own elected representative, over which you have traction, because that elected representative needs to demonstrate to you that he or she is acting in your interest. So we'd much rather see a smaller number of personalized responses going to MEPs in particular, but also MPs, than seeing large numbers of postcards that, to be frank, the MP or the MEP never see if they're postcards with all they get binned and recycled before they even see them. Yeah.
So to actually put your personal story of why you want to keep this freedom of choice in these supplements or these herbs for your own particular health.
Correct, and making sure that whatever is said is factually accurate.
Yes. Yeah.
Our website, anh-europe.org, is a pretty useful starting point to get accurate information
Yes.
on these issues.
Yes.
Because if you give and there is a lot of incorrect information out there on the internet, but if you give incorrect information, it gives the elected representative immediately the opportunity to provide a form response, and then they start to think themselves, well, actually there isn't a problem because people have just got the wrong end of the stick.
Yeah, and I'd like to reiterate there what a fantastic site the Alliance for Natural Health is. There is so much information on there that people can utilise and follow the links, and I'll just repeat that link: www.anh-europe.org. So if everybody that were using these products, these herbal supplements, these nutrients, all took the time to sit down tonight and pen these letters, do you think that this is going to make a big difference, and will the MEPs listen?
Well, they are starting to listen. I mean, last Wednesday we were at a briefing in Brussels, and there was a record turnout. We've got a story on it on our website. It's a lead story on our website at the moment, and they are starting to realise that a lot of consumers out there are very concerned, and of course, once they realise that, it sort of becomes a more important issue for them to deal with, because they realise that if they want to keep their position and all the perks of being an MEP or an MP going, they better be responsive to whatever their electorate wants. So,
yes.
We had a very good turnout last Wednesday, and of course, on the herbal front, what's becoming apparent is that a lot of the MEPs who voted for this herbal directive back in 2004 were expecting to see was a herbal directive that would act as an appropriate regulatory framework for most of the big traditions, including the Asiatic ones. And now what they discover is that actually it locks those whole traditions out, and these whole traditions are a grave risk of falling between the two stools of medicinal law and food law. They've got nowhere to go in this ring-fenced environment of regulation that Europe has created. So they literally get lost between these two stools of law.
So if we could just mention quickly the difference between things that were classed as food supplements again and the things that are classed as medicines, because there does seem to be some confusion over this, and things that we have been using as a food supplement have now fallen into this medicinal category.
Yes, that is an important distinction, and of course that relates to the fourth major regulatory area out of the big four, which is actually European medicinal law. And European medicinal law is actually set so incredibly broadly that by definition it makes pretty much everything we eat a medicine. So if you look at the definition, it has two limbs. It has a presentation limb, which is, if you indicate your substance for the purpose of treating or preventing a disease, or actually diagnosing a disease, then it's deemed a medicinal product. And of course, food supplements, you tend not to do that, so you don't get caught by the presentation limb if you label responsibly. The functional limb, on the other hand, is a very different story. Everything is caught by it, because it basically says, in essence, that a substance or a combination of substances that corrects, modifies, or restores physiological functions in the body and exerts a pharmacological, metabolic, or immunological action is a medicine. And of course, a glass of water, a cup of tea, or a nut is immediately going to be regarded as medicine. Now, the only exemption from that comes into the preamble of the directive that says if a product is clearly a food or a food supplement, it is outside the remit of the medicines directive. The complicating aspect is that under Article 2.2 of the same directive, it basically says, in cases of doubt, medicinal law shall have supremacy over any other law. So,
Why doesn't
so
that surprise me?
yeah. So essentially, what the regulator has is a loaded gun. They say everything is a law unless it's clearly a food. Now, what does that mean in practice?
Yeah.
A food, is really anything that is normally considered to be part of the diet. And this concept of normally being a constituent of the diet is actually one of the parameters that the regulators are using. So you've got to be able to demonstrate that something is normally consumed for nutritional purposes. A food supplement is basically a food or food constituent that is consumed in dose form. So if you look at something like Marmite or butter, they are concentrated foods, but they're not delivered in dose form. You're not told you've got to take, X milligrams of butter every day, and you're not told that you've got to have exactly a quarter of a teaspoon of Marmite with your breakfast. When you have a food supplement, you need to actually stipulate a recommended dose, and in fact, under food supplement law, you've got to have a particular precaution that says you are not allowed to, consumers shouldn't exceed the maximum recommended dose. So that's the only difference between a food supplement and a food. Both of them must not step on the toes of being a medicine, and therefore they must be clearly foods. Now, in essence, what that means is that those foods and food constituents need to have a recorded history of food usage. And what we're finding is pretty disastrous at the moment for many of the non-European herbs. So if you look not only at the Asiatic traditions, but also the Southern African ones, and at the South American, the Amazonian traditions, for example, you will find that many of the herbs that are of interest in Europe and are currently being consumed as food supplements that are now increasingly being regarded as medicinal by regulators, they have actually had a long history of food usage in those countries. But how interesting it is to find that the regulators are turning around saying, do you know, we're not that interested in accepting food use from outside the EU.
Absolutely. I find it also incredulous, really, and I'm sure many people listening to this interview will feel the same. It's just beggars belief.
Well, it's what we're talking about now is really only even scraping the surface of the problem. The problem is so deep rooted in the psyche of regulators that, for the most part, do not understand fully what it is that they are doing, because they have so little understanding of the leading edge of natural healthcare. And they are being driven by corporations and others who love every part of it, because it basically locks out the players that in essence are competition to them. So it's the whole thing. The more you look at it, it reads like one of the most complex and contrived detective novels you've ever read.
It certainly does. Well, all I can say is thank you so much, Dr. Verkerk, for joining us today. It's been so informative, so useful. I would urge everybody that wants freedom of choice on what you decide to put into your body, how you manage your own health, and if you don't want faulty manipulated science to dictate what you do, act now. Go to www.anh-europe.org. Have a look at the information, the documents to download, everything you need to make it easy for you to navigate yourself through this minefield of misinformation and confusion. And let's try and address this now rather than leaving it until it really is too late. So again, Dr. Verkerk, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for all that you're doing to help people to fight this cause.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Claire, and thank you for your part in helping to get the message out. It is absolutely key to do that, and thank you for any support that comes as a result of it.
Great, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, there we have it. Frightening stuff. If you go to our show notes, you will have plenty of information that will help you, which websites to go to, which links to follow. Please write to your MEP, as Dr. Verkerk said. Our website is www.thelightsandenergychannel.tv, and also find us on Facebook. In Light and Energy from me, Claire Wiles, goodbye.